This story is about guarding an isolated cabin where people had previously been hurt, trapped, and abandoned. I took the job because it paid cash and because no one else wanted night shifts in a place cut off from everything. The cabin sat deep in the mountains, surrounded by trees dense enough to block headlights and sound. There was no electricity, no internet, and no reliable radio signal once night fell. I arrived before sunset, checked the doors, and locked myself inside with a flashlight, a notebook, and a basic first aid kit. The owner told me my job was to make sure no one broke in or stayed overnight. He mentioned noise complaints from nearby hikers, but he avoided details and left quickly. When darkness settled, the cold stabilized and never changed, as if the air had decided on one temperature and refused to move. I began routine rounds, checking each wall and window with the light. Around midnight, a scream passed through the wooden walls, sharp and human, then stopped. It didn't echo like something outside. It sounded filtered, pressed through layers of wood. I wrote the time down, assuming it was someone far off on the trail. An hour later, another scream came. Same tone, same length, same direction. I counted it as the second. Near 2 a.m., a third scream followed, completing a pattern I didn't yet understand. The next night, the same sequence repeated at nearly identical times. I started counting the screams each night to stay alert and awake. Every scream sounded real, strained, and short, like breath running out. On the fourth night, I noticed scrape marks on the outside wall near the back door. They were fresh and low, like something dragged. Inside, the air smelled slightly metallic, which I blamed on old pipes. I slept in a chair with my boots on and the flashlight in my hand. Each night after that, the screams continued, always 3, always spaced apart. I checked the perimeter during the day and found no footprints leading away. I found a loose floorboard near the storage room, but didn't lift it yet. On the 7th night, the first scream sounded closer, like it came from the wall behind me. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard breathing stop suddenly. I pulled back and wrote faster in the notebook. The second scream came. Then silence stretched longer than usual. I waited for the third, counting seconds aloud. It never came. That's when I thought it was over. I had no idea what was about to happen next. The story isn't over. Subscribe to continue. The silence after the second scream felt wrong, because the pattern had never failed before. I walked the length of the cabin, checking every wall with the flashlight. The storage room floorboard was now lifted slightly, exposing a dark gap beneath. I knelt and aimed the light inside, seeing disturbed dirt and something reflective. I reached in and touched cold metal that wasn't part of the structure. I pulled out a set of handcuffs attached to a short chain. Underneath, I found dried fabric and a shoe sole torn at the heel. I understood then that people hadn't been screaming outside the cabin. The screams were traveling through the structure from below. I replaced the floorboard and backed away slowly. The next night, I stayed awake, sitting against the far wall. The first scream came earlier than usual and lasted longer. I heard movement under the floor afterward, like shifting weight. The second scream followed quickly, closer than before. I stood and moved toward the door, but the handle didn't turn fully. Someone had reinforced it from the outside. I struck the door with my shoulder, leaving a dent, but no opening. Beneath my feet, something hit the floor from below, hard enough to shake dust loose. I heard a muffled voice counting. The third scream came suddenly, loud enough to make my ears ring. I dropped the flashlight and backed into the corner. The notebook fell open to earlier entries, showing 7 nights of 3 marks each. The next day, I found fresh food wrappers beneath the cabin, along with a bucket of water tied to a rope. Someone had been using the space regularly. That night, the first scream was replaced by pounding. The second was replaced by pleading words I couldn't fully hear. The third never came. The pounding shifted toward the spot where I slept. A blade pierced up through the floor, splitting wood inches from my foot. I moved to the opposite wall, keeping distance. The blade withdrew and struck again, closer this time. I understood the count wasn't about the screams. It was about how many people were still alive. I stayed awake until dawn, listening to slow movement below me. On the 10th night, the owner didn't show up with supplies. My water was almost gone. The first scream came, then stopped abruptly. The second never came. I heard breathing directly under me. The floorboard began to lift on its own. I knew the count was down to 1. I dragged the heavy table across the floor and pinned the loose board down with my weight. Beneath me, something struggled and then went still. The air filled with a smell I couldn't ignore anymore. I stayed there until my legs cramped and my hands went numb. When I moved the table at sunrise, the board stayed down on its own. I didn't look underneath. I waited for night anyway, because leaving meant crossing the trees alone. When darkness fell, there were no screams at all. Instead, there was scratching inside the walls. It moved slowly, methodically, circling. I realized there had never been 3 victims at once. There had been 2 below and 1 above. Each night, 1 was replaced. The owner had rotated guards. The missing scream was mine. I wrote my name in the notebook and placed it on the table. The scratching stopped directly behind my head. A voice came through the wall, calm and close, telling me to stay still. The wall panel loosened as tools worked from the other side. I stayed seated and didn't resist. The panel came away, revealing a narrow space just wide enough for a body. I saw blood stains layered over older ones. I stepped back, tripped, and fell against the pinned floorboard. It cracked open under my weight. I dropped into the space below, with no way to climb out. Above me, the wall closed again. I heard footsteps retreat and a lock slide into place. In the dark, I found the chain fixed into concrete. I attached it myself because I understood the pattern completely now. When the first scream came, it was mine, short and cut off. When the second came, It was someone new upstairs. The third never came because there was no third anymore. The count was finished. One last question. If you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest. What does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now. The best story is coming next.